Hey guys, I'm Josh, and we're going to get right to it. In the next 12 minutes, I'm going to share the two-part formula that has helped me make over $1.5 million as an AI and automation consultant who takes on clients and works on high-ticket retainers and builds tech as someone who isn't technical. And I'm going to explain exactly how you can use AI and no-code tools within this formula to create a new income stream or even start a new career. The world is changing so meaningfully. Software development is getting commoditized by these AI models. It's becoming democratized so that even people like me who aren't technical are able to build solutions that businesses will pay a ton of money for. And so if you're feeling stuck or you're trying to angle up for a promotion in your job or you're saving money to try and take a big swing at something, this business model, taking on clients and building tech, is such a powerful mechanism for making money by creating value with the work product we produce. And if you're thinking, oh, I don't know, one time I tried to build an automation in Zapier and I got stuck, well, I will see your imposter syndrome and I will raise you my own, because I was so consumed with the idea of trying to understand everything when I first got started taking on clients. And at a certain point, after a few weeks, I just had to push the big red fuck it button and say, I'm going to go for it. And make sure to stick around to the end, because I want to explain the counterintuitive reason why operating inside of this framework actually gives us what I think is a legitimate competitive advantage compared to incumbent traditional software developers. Let's drill into this. So we want to build a profitable AI no-code automation consulting company. Just for context, in this line of work, sometimes we're using no-code tools like Airtable or Softer or N8N or Notion. And in other cases, we are building inside of Cursor. I consider this to still be no-code because we're using AI in a way that allows us to build in plain English. And it's so good that with English as our primary coding language, we can not only write a bunch of code, but actually use the model to help us understand what we're building. I built this website. I was working with a couple of people that I took on in like a mentorship capacity. And within the past 90 minutes, we basically built this project out. Right now, we're looking at this running locally, but this was actually deployed to a server and then I revoked some API keys. Anyways, I just wanted to paint a little bit of a picture, but listen to me when I tell you that in this line of work, if our goal is to make money more than anything else, the tech itself and the implementation is important, but it's only one piece of this larger equation. And that's why it's so important to understand this right here. So let's really get into it. The first piece of this equation, our success formula, is iteration speed. Now, when I got started doing this, I always knew that if there was an instance where a client wanted something that was technically possible, but it was maybe outside the boundary of what I was comfortable building with no code, I could bring in a developer, staff them on the project, and drive revenue. I would carve out a portion of that cash, use it to pay for a developer, and everyone makes money. The product is awesome. We're all winning. But even with that being true, I made a concerted effort to build out as many of my projects as possible using no-code tools, because what it allowed for us to do was to iterate faster. Imagine the most technical person that you can, an L9 engineer at Google that maybe handles networking and infra and all these things that are messy and scary. When presented with a hard problem, it might be the case that this incredibly technical engineer would get the answer right on the first try. The first time that they go in and try and implement a solution, they approach it very methodically. It takes them a bit and then they get it. Okay, that's all well and good, but now let's consider the counterfactual here. Imagine that we give a similarly hard problem to someone like myself who builds tech but uses AI and LLMs and no-code tools in order to do so. It might be the case that on my first attempt, and then my second attempt, and then my third attempt, and seventh and eighth and ninth and 10th, it takes me a long time to reach that final answer. But eventually we will get this implementation correct if we iterate enough times. And that is one of the disgusting advantages that AI and no-code development afford us. This might seem trivial or look incredibly daunting. Running into a wall 9 times before we land something doesn't instill a whole lot of confidence, but it's so important to recognize that there's inherent value in going this deep with a problem. And beyond that, we're not static creatures. We're capable of growth and self-development. And what happens when you wrestle with a problem for a long enough time is that the next time that you have to solve something similar, sure, maybe you're not the L9 Google engineer just yet, but that doesn't mean that you can't harden your understanding of how certain parts of the tech ecosystem work and become more efficient. Now, understanding that basic premise, let's talk about the next key piece of this equation, which is our ability to harness feedback. And this is going to get a little bit nuanced, but I know you can understand it, and it's so important to really kind of let this sink in. At face value, harnessing feedback seems like a pretty easy thing to do. However, we as humans are emotional creatures, and we are so doggedly good at introducing our biases and preconceived notions and feelings into whatever it is that we're building or trying to evaluate objectively. I feel the need to add this little arrow here because the idea of moving fast and breaking things, which is probably a little idiom, their concept, whatever, that you've heard before, is so interconnected with the idea of efficiently gathering feedback. Now, when we make a decision to optimize for a certain amount of speed in the way that we approach things, there's inherently, just like anything else in life, a certain risk that is sitting on the other side of that decision. For instance, let's say that we're not necessarily servicing a client and we have made the foolhardy decision of trying to bring our own app to market before actually using a client as a sandbox in order to validate the market. But maybe we get lucky and it turns out that we're actually able to gain adoption with 1,000 users at first. Okay, so now as we're moving fast and breaking things, it might be the case that we actually do break something and we do something that has an adverse impact on our first 1,000 users. If you've ever built anything and put it in front of your mom or a client or a batch of a client's end users or actual end users yourself because you're running a company, you have maybe run into this problem where something has gone wrong and it has felt like the absolute end of the world because we as emotional creatures have such a hard time separating ourselves from the thing that we're intimately working on in a way that lets us see the bigger picture. When we isolate our first 1,000 users, it might hurt us in our soul. But if we're actually evaluating things objectively, in the scale of things, it's probably more like an oopsies. Because if this is a project that we raised some money for, we probably put together a pitch deck and we put it in front of a VC. And on slide 3 of our deck, we probably ballparked our TAM at $15 billion annually. And so, okay, maybe we incurred like a little bit of reputational risk, but oh no, of those 1,000 people, there's still a market of 300 million other consumers who have no idea what happened or what our app is, for whom we can approach with fresh eyes. This isn't even like a drop in the bucket. This is like a drop in Niagara. I might just totally be projecting here, and so forgive my like warped, fucked up cognition, but at least for me, and I think this is kind of universal, we tend to have this like weird limiting belief system where we see the downside as being super imminent and we can imagine it and feel it so vividly, but we don't put ourselves in that same like upside imaginary world. It might just be a certain like biological conditioning to the extent that we've evolved to think preeminently about things that could harm us. But the really funny thing is that I might have mentioned it before. I work with people and help them get started building their automation agencies. And I only take on like a very few people at a time. And so I work like really intimately with people. As I am, sitting, breaking down someone's business and we're like scoping a project or building something out or doing whatever, I will tend to see things a little bit more objectively as a third party looking into their business. And often for me, it's like so clear that they're so well positioned for something and I'm perceiving their reality in this way, but they are looking at things through this kind of limited lens. Anyways, forgive the little tangent there. I want to stay really rooted in breaking down our winning formula. So one of the reasons why this framework is so powerful is because at the end of the day, you more often than not are probably going to be an unreliable narrator, which is me kind of borrowing this term and maladapting it for our case here. But what I mean by this is you might have some deep sense of conviction about what your client needs or what you think they want or about a product that you want to bring to market, but you are biased and there's no way around it. And it's not bad. It's great to have a certain sense of conviction. And the problem is that sometimes people have convictions and then those actually pan out, right? Everyone loves to point to Steve Jobs as this sort of visionary who ignored the consumer and instead just crafted this thing fit to his exact vision. And then he gave it to them and it was like, I know what you want and you didn't. Now, let me be clear. I honestly do really feel like there are times and places where it's important to make unilateral decisions. But I tend to think that that work happens a layer down. In order to find product market fit or traction or one of these really important, like meaty business levers, I mean, I'm just going to cut myself off because you guys already know what I'm going to say. And the somewhat ironic part of the pushback from traditional developers, or like the turning of a nose at someone who's a vibe coder, is that this playbook is adapted from the popularized like best practices out of Silicon Valley. Paul Graham, launching too slow has probably killed 100 times more startups than launching too fast. Matt Mullenweg, this one's very well known. If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. And this one from Ben Horowitz, who is the founder of Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z, often any decision, even the wrong decision, is better than no decision. And I love that one because in my business, as of late, what I've come to recognize is that there are few things that are more expensive than indecision. It's so fucking expensive, and forgive the expletive. I only use it really as a tool to drive home this point. Now, if we keep all of that in mind and we revisit this little graph from before, what becomes really clear is that this dynamic, right, making these mistakes, iterating this number of times, even if it's in this way that feels so frustrating that eventually does, though, end up leading to the correct solution, it's a feature, not a bug. There's value all the way down the line here. And one of the reasons that I have found this to totally be the case is because in refining something over and over and over, what ends up happening is we learn more about the problem set and the way that we can solve it using different solutions, but we also learn more about the business. We end up touching base with different stakeholders inside of one of our clients' organizations, or any number of different things happen that ultimately just lead to us becoming more deeply ingrained and creating this more holistic understanding. I also feel like there's another way that we can kind of extrapolate out what this framework actually looks like in practice or how it materializes, and that's by redefining it slightly. When we say that the winning formula is just any amount of forward progress in the right direction, that's really powerful. And you can imagine why that's the case, because if we're even making just incremental progress in the direction of our goal across an infinite timeline, it means that success is inevitable. We will eventually get there. And the reason why I really love this frame is because it gives us control over our destiny. If we want to create compression in that timeline, then we can do so with our actions and effort. I think this also makes it really easy to see why so many people don't find success, because the condition to this formula is that we are pursuing the right opportunities. So many people work so incredibly hard in a way that's almost admirable, but they don't harness feedback in a way that angles them directionally towards their goal. And so they end up veering way off course, and all of a sudden they end up out here, but the trophy's down here. And truth be told, for so long, I existed in this liminal space, this no man's land, and it's the worst. It's the worst spot to be, because you're doing everything that you believe you should be, but something isn't clicking, and it's not a function of your effort. But that's how we create the compression and get to success. It can drive you absolutely mad. And I'm sitting here with a smile on my face, but I know exactly how painful those nights can be. And honestly, that was one of the reasons why I started working with people. I don't really talk about this all that much because it's like a really limited size of people that we do work with, in part just because it's so intimate. But I found all of these people who would go to school and they would get a good degree and they would be working in this job that was otherwise starting to kind of squeeze them, or they just weren't feeling fulfilled. And so they would start pursuing these different side hustles, and they had all the intellectual firepower to be successful, but they were just working on the wrong problems, or they were working on the right general problem, but they were executing with the wrong sort of paradigm, right? They would get to this point on the graph, and then all of a sudden they would just veer off because they were pitching a project, but they did a poor job of scoping it. And then rather than just bringing in a third-party dev, they tried to white knuckle it and ended up refunding a consumer. And I feel like I've just seen it all. And so to that extent, if you're someone who really is interested in learning how to do this, we have a couple of spots available for the next cohort, and I will drop the link below to apply. Anyways, I hope that you guys found this really helpful. Iteration and harnessing feedback. Just hold on to those two things really tightly and put as much of the human shit and bias as you possibly can manage, like off in the corner over there. The other thing that I want you to put over there, which has kind of become just like a general ethos of mine, is the technical stuff, because it's important to understand it. But again, that is just one piece of the equation. If what we're actually optimizing for is dollars at the end of the day, if we want to run a successful business, the tech is one part of this much greater puzzle. Whereas if we just want to build something really cool, like a passion project for ourselves, okay, go watch all the N8N tutorials. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe, because it creates this feedback loop where then all of a sudden I want to make more content. Weird how it's like someone sitting at a desk in Google's Chelsea Market engineered that outcome so that I would want to continue to post on this platform. I wonder how that happened. Regardless, thank you guys, and go build.